Live. Hello everyone, good afternoon, and delighted to welcome you all to this 7th episode in a series of informal broadcast chats and interviews with interesting guests and personalities called In Conversation With, hosted by myself, Michael McGrath, on behalf of the Muscle Help Foundation charity. As we've previously said, the mission of these conversations is to help our community of muscle warriors across the country feel less isolated, less alone, and more connected and engaged. Plus, you know what? We always have some fun, especially on a really hot afternoon like it is today with the thermometer nudging 36, certainly where I am. I know that many of you are still shielding. So for me today, Friday, the 7th of August, is day 148. And I know that because of COVID-19, many of you are still not venturing out, and I know it's hard. I'm reminded that during these testing times, one's resilience is all about accepting the new reality, if you like, even if it's not as good as perhaps the one that we all had before. So take it one day at a time. And yes, as a small charity, we're now operating in a different way. We're focused more now than ever in bringing a little joy and magic through our virtual muscle dream interventions to the homes of our beneficiaries across the country. And we're working hard in bringing our community together, our tribe of muscle warriors in, for example, having conversations like this afternoon that hopefully enlighten, inspire, and conversations that we know from, certainly from previous episodes, can also be a lot of fun. So onwards, a few quick housekeeping points. First up, a little safeguarding note. Ladies and gentlemen, we have eyes over this broadcast, so if any inappropriate comments or behaviors are observed, we will take action. Secondly, all episodes are recorded and streamed on the charity's Facebook and YouTube channels. Please do check back at any time, and as always, you're all invited to get involved, and please share, comment, follow, and of course, subscribe if you're heading onto our YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's talk sport psychology, balancing performance and athlete well-being. Please give it up for Erin Prior. Hi, Erin, welcome.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. We made it to Friday, and warm enough for you?
Just about, yeah. Yeah, nice and warm, nice and toasty.
Nice and toasty, excellent. Well, listen, before we kick off, I happen to know that one of your favorite movies is Love Actually. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
All right, we're just painting a picture here for our audience.
Yeah.
So, as well as the romantic drama film based on F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby, I think, with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's one of your favorite movies. Is that right? When did you last see that film?
Probably a few months ago. I've got it on DVD, but I just, love all the 1920s, all that kind of thing. So to be back in the 20s, maybe not the start we wanted, but it's pretty cool.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Now, I also happen to know that when you were a little younger, you were a bit of a fan of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Specifically, David Tennant. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And given the opportunity, Erin, if you could perhaps invite one celebrity to your home for tea, who might that be?
It would be David Tennant, for sure.
Probably David Tennant.
Yeah,
I think so. Now, of course, I've got a bit of a surprise for you this afternoon. No, I'm just kidding. He's not going to.
That would be nice.
He's not going to magically pop up, in this conversation. I promise you. But I'm going to pop up a couple of images. Maybe you can just share with us a little bit, because I know that archery is one of your great passions in terms of the sport that you love. Tell us a little bit about these. We've got a couple of pics and we're going to show shortly. So tell us a little about your love of archery.
Yeah, so I started when I was 11 years old. So I've been shooting and competing for about 14 years now. So started with my mum and my dad, so it's quite a family affair, and still is really, which is really nice. Just gives us kind of a nice way to stay connected, and I guess as you get older and work takes over and things like that, it's nice to have something in common. But yeah, so I've been doing that for a while. I've done some international stuff as a junior, and did some traveling with that, which was really nice, great opportunity. And yeah, so still trying to maintain it now alongside work, but obviously stuff can get in the way a little bit sometimes. But trying to maintain it as much as possible. And I think, for me, I really want to try and keep the archery going so I can kind of empathize with any athletes that I work with, the pressure that you feel when you're in that competition, that all those emotions and what can go on. So I'm really trying to kind of stay in that so I can kind of stay connected to what it feels like to perform.
So the pictures we're looking at here, the 22, 23, 24, 25, is that your scores? Are those the scores? What's going on there?
No, so that's the target numbers. So you'll be given a target number, and then each one of those bits on the target is a target face. So you'll sort of aim at one specific one. So there'll be 4 archers on each target, and you're basically given a target list at the start. So it's all arranged, and you generally tend to stay on the same target all day and have target buddies. So yeah.
I did a bit of archery at school, but I kept missing the bullseye. It was not particularly. You need a steady arm, don't you? And it's good eye and a good eye.
Yeah.
And tell me, where Loughborough, was that your university? Is that right?
Yeah. So Loughborough is where I did my my master's degree in sports psychology, and I'm currently studying there part-time, doing a PhD. So I'm kind of back there, which is nice. That was my master's graduation a few years ago now, 3 years ago now. So yeah, no, it's a great place, and obviously a great hub for sport and all things sport and performance. So yeah, it's the kind of ideal place to be, really.
Real sense of release in throwing those caps up, isn't it? In that moment, it's wonderful,
sure.
wonderful. And
you're out of the
way. And you mentioned your PhD. What are you studying?
So it's a sports psychology based PhD, and it's on athlete mental health in elite sport. So at the moment, there's quite a lot of research about athletes and sort of mental ill health and mental health, and sort of the challenges they can face. But what we're finding at the moment is there's not as many kind of provisions, so policies, places for them to get support, or at least it's not always signposted maybe as well as it could be. So I'm kind of at the moment looking at that, kind of delving into that, and I think it's really quite relevant given what's kind of going on with everyone right now.
Yeah, for sure. And before we delve into the world of sports psychology and well-being and performance, I want to just stop the conversation for a second and just invite you to visualize for a moment, Erin. Stay with me on this one, right? Just visualize that you're on a desert island. Okay, the sun is shining, the waves are lapping the shore. Okay, the crickets are singing, and perhaps you'd like to tell us your number one or top 2 favorite albums. Music that perhaps has impacted your life in some way.
It's a tricky one. There's quite a few. I would say anything by Mumford & Sons, as I'm a massive fan of theirs. They're my favourite band. I've seen them quite a few times.
Yeah.
So anything by them is upbeat, a bit alternative, which I think I kind of tend to like. What else am I listening to? Probably things like Lana Del Rey. So again, maybe a bit kind of alternative, not as sort of mainstream, but still good, I think. So that's probably what I'd pick.
Good stuff. So here's a question that's coming through. Why did you choose psychology as opposed to psychiatry? And by that I mean the difference between the balanced mind, if you like, and the unbalanced mind.
I guess as a starting point, psychiatry traditionally tends to be quite clinical based. And I was always sort of interested in the more sports side of things, that sporting context, and sort of seeing, people's mentality or mental health and mental illness play out in sport. So I'd say that sort of led me down maybe more the psychology route. But I suppose I always would say, even though sports psychology isn't necessarily obviously dealing with those clinical issues, as we know, things can, crop up in those sporting environments. So I think, although, yes, it is a separate discipline and you need to be adequately qualified in psychiatry, sports psychologists can still play a really substantial role in, like we say, signposting, getting people to the right place. So for me, I think it was just driven by probably wanting to help people enhance performance, mainly, which is probably what people really link sports psychology with. But within that, I think we're sort of seeing now how there is more of a responsibility with mental health on sports psychologists and not just sort of separating psychology and the clinical side, if that sort of makes sense.
Okay, so in plain English or in layman's terms, what exactly is sports psychology? Let's just try and unpick it a bit in this conversation.
Yeah, so essentially it's just looking at the mental side of your sport, and so it's your mental game, it's performing under pressure, it's confidence levels, team dynamics, anything that you can think about, where it might impact your mindset, and literally just putting it in that sporting context. So a lot of the principles, if not all of them, can be used in business, in education, in your personal life as well, which I think is great because hopefully, your clients can take things away to use in other aspects of their life. But it is purely kind of then put into a sport or exercise sort of performance environment. So like I say, looking at those main things of that kind of performing under pressure, helping you get the most out of your performance. And I think, it's really more and more over the years recently becoming a key aspect of certainly elite sport, but in my mind, sort of all levels of sport. Because obviously everyone's very tactically and technically aware. But for me, if you struggle then to bring that to the forefront when it's sort of most important, when you're under that pressure, then you're not going to obviously be able to always achieve your potential. So I think for me, bringing in that psychology really is key. And I think we've really seen that in the development of the field over the past, quite a few years now.
Am I right in thinking that that you've done some work with the FA?
Yes, yeah. So I work with the FA sort of on the England Powerchair Football Squad. So I've been working with them for nearly 2 years now, which has absolutely flown. We tend to only kind of meet up at training camps when we're sort of in the lead up to a sort of international tournament. So we had sort of a handful of camps leading up to Finland last year in May. And then we'll obviously have some more leading up to the World Cup in Australia, which has obviously now been moved back to 2022. But yeah, so working with them, and that's been great. And there's been some other opportunities to get involved with some of the other psychologists at the FA, with the other sort of para teams, and then obviously branch out into Powerchair football sort of under sort of the WFA as well, which has been really, really great.
We're gonna come back to the WFA and Powerchair football in a minute. Just some questions already coming into our live chat room, which is wonderful. Question here: who are your sporting heroes? Do you have a sporting hero or someone in particular that you are inspired by?
I think probably I'd have to say Jessica Ennis-Hill is one that really stands out for me. Doing the heptathlon, so many events obviously you have to be really good at. It's that consistency, it's holding your nerve over 2 days of competition, winning obviously Olympic gold when she was the kind of poster girl of the event, which I think, must put quite a lot of pressure on a person. And then going away and having a baby and coming back and getting another silver medal 4 years later. So I think for me, on all angles, she's a really good kind of role model, I think, in sport.
It's quite impressive, isn't it, to be able to, as you say, a role model, but also I think she conducts herself in a extraordinary way in terms of how she engages with all sorts of different communities and different organizations and the work that she does. What's the best part, Erin, for you in terms of working in sport?
I would say it probably sounds cheesy, but probably helping people, achieve their ambitions, hopefully support them to fulfill their potential, and just really kind of being there for people and helping them sort of maximize their performance, really. And so that's something for me, back to Finland last year really did sort of stand out for me as a career highlight so far. And just that feeling, that sort of adrenaline, that emotion that you get when the team obviously won the tournament, you just can't really describe it. And I think, obviously whether you're an athlete, whether you're a coach, whether you're a psychologist, if you're all kind of committed and passionate about your job, you'll all feel that same rush. So I think for me, that's probably one of the best bits.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Just for those that are tuning in, because there are people tuning in all the time, what happened in Finland, just for the record?
Oh, we won on penalties, which I think is pretty good going for an England team against France, obviously. So winning the EPFA Nations Cup, which was really good. And I think, we were confident I guess speaking on behalf of the team, but confident going into it that we had a good chance. But it's, like any tournament, not without its challenges and not without other tough kind of opponents. So I think, these things are never a given. So to really kind of push through the week and come out winning the tournament was great for the whole team.
Question for you, another one coming through here in our chat room. Will elite sports coaches and managers in the future be psychologists, perhaps, rather than physical trainers?
I would say there's probably separate roles for a reason, definitely, at this point. I think, coaches and managers, they all have their own sort of unique skill sets, different to psychologists. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they would be that instead. What I would say is perhaps more in future, there'll be tend to be hopefully more psychologists on teams at different levels, not just the elite level, but grassroots as well, where possible. And I think, the relationship between the different people that work in sports really important, and trying to create that good relationship between a coach and yourself as a psychologist is really the kind of foundation of your work, because obviously if they can buy into that, if they can support that and integrate that into their training sessions, then it's so much more impactful. So I definitely say they'll stay separate, but hopefully working closer together in future.
So, hey, I've got to ask you the question. Have you tried Powerchair football yourself?
Do you know, I haven't yet, actually. I haven't. But I do know we did have a training camp, one of the England camps, where a couple of the staff members did kind of jump into their power chairs, obviously with permission. And it did have a bit of a whiz around, which seemed kind of terrifying. I do think it would be good to have a go at some point. I'm sure someone will rope me into it. But I do think, at some point, I probably will have to kind of experience it, just so I can kind of see what everyone else does and kind of the skill behind it.
Hi, so we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here, and Michael has temporarily had to come off the chat. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Grace. I've jumped on board recently to help with the social media stuff, so I'm just going to carry on having a chat with Erin. So we've had another question that's come in, and it says, how do you start to deal with a sports person who seems to have a mental block that holds them back? For example, Elise Christie.
So I think that's quite a big question probably to try and get into. I suppose if I can try and provide a little bit of insight on that. But these things are really quite complex and can take a lot of time to kind of sort through. I think to start with, it's all about trying to understand, for me, the kind of root of the challenge. So what's occurring and why that might be. And for me, that's really key for both me to understand it, but also the athlete as well. Because then we can look to see if there's any maybe unhelpful kind of thoughts or beliefs they might hold that we can challenge, and kind of put some more helpful beliefs in place, which then tends to kind of help with things like blocks. I think a big part of it is sort of developing that self-awareness in the first place and sort of understanding why these things might be occurring. I think it's difficult. Obviously, the example there given is Elise Christie, to comment. I couldn't comment specifically on her as an athlete, having not worked with her. But I think, there's lots of different things that you would do, definitely trying to figure out the root of the problem. And then just putting lots of probably techniques in place. But I think for me, she's had to deal with so many setbacks. It's for me looking at, okay, how does she kind of move on from that? How does she learn from perhaps the past challenges? But then be able to move on sufficiently enough to, keep that confidence, keep that conviction in her performance. And I'm pretty sure she's going for the next Olympic Games again. So she's obviously wanting another stab at it, which is really great. But I think, to kind of putting that hard work in and trying to kind of get to grips with what the main challenge is really.
And then, so another question is, do teams have a collective psychology? So when you go in, do you have to kind of get to know each individual and then work with them as a team, or do you go in with a team and then as you get to know them, work with them individually?
So I would say, I suppose, drawing from my kind of England Powerchair experience, I think it's important to really try and just integrate yourself into the environment, and probably just get a feel for the group and just see what the dynamics are and see what the environment's like. There will always be lots of different characters, and some people may be more open to sports psychology than others. So it's kind of understanding that. And I think a really important part of that also is not just looking at athletes, but also thinking about coaches, other staff, and parents and carers as well, because they're all kind of key parts of that sporting environment. So really kind of involving everybody. But I would say probably to start with, I tend to kind of observe a little bit, maybe kind of on the outside a little bit, just to get a sense. But then I think it's quite important to just kind of integrate yourself in there quite quickly, and get people to hopefully get to know you as well. So then I would say that's where people maybe feel more comfortable to get to know you individually once they've sort of known you as a group, met you in a group setting, and then you can sort of build those sort of more individual relationships as well.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, so Michael is back, and so he will come back and take over with the questions.
Oh, sorry about that, Erin. There's a little Friday afternoon gremlin that just decided to send. It happens. I can only apologise to our viewers and to you, Erin. Thank you so much to Grace for continuing the conversation. So I just want to pick up on Finland. Tell us a little bit about the journey to Finland. I think that was something that I'd really like to hear a little bit about.
Yeah. So we had, I think it was about 6 kind of monthly camps in the lead up to the tournament. So that was the first time I was working with the team. So for me, it was quite important to, like I was saying, they're really kind of get integrated quite quickly. Obviously, for me, it was a new sport at the time. So it's trying to learn about the sport and the demands and what the players and the coaching staff feel are the kind of key skills and characteristics of a great player. And then sort of once I felt like I was sort of slowly integrating in, although I do think Finland was really great from my perspective to integrate further into the team, we really just kind of focused on giving the players sort of things to think about, things to focus on for Finland. So it might be things like a session on developing confidence.
Yeah.
So looking at how confidence is multidimensional. We want it to come from lots of different sources, so that if you have a bad day in one respect, you've still got lots of confidence in other areas. So it won't really affect your self-esteem. We'll look at performing under pressure kind of techniques. So that could be using kind of positive self-talk and sort of affirmations, or it could be using sort of visualization. And then one of the sort of bigger pieces that we did was sort of around that team kind of philosophy and culture. So there was a kind of desire for that, just to kind of pull the team together and kind of understand the team's beliefs and values and aspirations. And I think a big part of that is holding each other accountable and ourselves accountable for that, and that's staff and athletes as well. And so that was one of the kind of bigger pieces, and we actually ended up with a sort of poster that was made that we then put up in Finland, sort of around our area, which hopefully the players found useful, just as that prompt. So they were kind of the main areas we really worked on, but I think a really key part of those camps was also building those relationships, because the team's quite sort of well established and it all worked together for a while. And then I was sort of the new kid on the block, new person coming in, and maybe something a little bit new as well. So, just trying to kind of bring something new to the environment. But I always try to kind of hopefully put across that we collaborate a lot together. So, rather than sort of coming in as that supposed expert on something, for me, hopefully I bring that knowledge and that experience. But for me, the players are really the experts in their own lives and their own experiences. So to try and kind of merge those two aspects together, and then I'd say we work collaboratively. And I think hopefully that's sort of just increasing more and more the more I kind of work with the team.
Out of interest, in terms of the England players and the whole team environment, the types of disabilities of those players, did any of them have muscular dystrophy by any chance?
I'm not sure the exact the disabilities of all the players. I think that's something that I haven't specifically spoken to each player about. I feel that, I suppose it's always going to be a bit of a challenging, well, maybe a challenging conversation. I suppose you have to, you know, for me, this is the first time working in a sort of para sport environment. So I think you have to kind of get your feelers out, and everyone's obviously different in how they handle things. But I definitely say, you know, for me, there's definitely been considerations working in that para environment for the first time. So, you know, normally you might use lots of questionnaires or things like that, and have everyone do lots of handwriting. And that obviously became clear quite quickly that really wasn't sort of something that was massively feasible for everybody. So it's just making it inclusive and just being adaptive as a practitioner, really. And I think that's a key aspect of your role in that para environment. And I hope that, you know, I've adapted fairly quickly. Hopefully the players will testify to that. But other than that, I think it's, you know, it's just working in a sport environment event like any other, essentially.
Got another question. Thank you for that. Another question coming through around, do female sports people have different psychological issues to men? So women seem to be catching up with men in terms of performance. You know, are they only limited by the physical differences?
I mean, for me, you know, I probably don't have the depth of knowledge on both men and women enough to say whether there are any sort of major differences. I guess from my own experience, I haven't found there to be many major differences per se. I would say sometimes working with female athletes, they can be more open to discussing confidence issues, you know, just feeling that lack of confidence a bit more. I don't think that's to say that male athletes don't sort of experience that lack of confidence, but they might not always be so forthcoming about it. But in my experience, you know, everyone's been very similar. And to me, sort of gender, sex doesn't really come into it in terms of who I'm working with. You know, from my perspective, everybody's unique anyway, and it's their unique experiences. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's something I kind of take into account. So I would say from my experience at the moment, everyone seems to sort of have the same kind of challenges that we all face, really.
How are plans shaping up, Erin, regarding the 2022 World Cup?
So I guess they're kind of put on halt a little bit, like much of everything else this year. So I think we were looking this year we were wanting to host a sort of friendly tournament sort of in the lead up to that, because obviously it was originally going to be next year. So we were kind of hoping that would be some sort of preparation, and obviously that hasn't been able to happen. But we have been doing some sessions over Zoom, which I know everyone's really familiar with now. So we've been doing some work over that, which has been great. And I think actually, you know, it's been good in the sense that I probably will use it more moving forward, because, like I say, we tend to have monthly camps in the lead up to a tournament, but we'll have quite substantial breaks in between that. So I think actually, from my perspective, getting more acquainted with that technology and doing some sessions over Zoom, like we have in the past couple of months, I think just gives us more, obviously, opportunity to keep working on their mental game. But for me, definitely, I think it would involve looking more at the philosophy type work, just really kind of pinning that down, see if it shifts over time. And probably more starting to look at kind of team dynamics, team strengths, and how we can kind of use our strengths as a team to kind of, I guess, give us some sort of leverage over opposition. So we're looking at that quite closely, and there's been some interesting stuff I've been reading up on. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting back into training with everybody and hopefully making some really good strides forward in that sense. Anything
you'd like to share in terms of those little magical insights, things that you're reading up on, that, or maybe for another day?
So I think
we don't want to be giving trade secrets away, do we?
No, not too much, no. But one thing we kind of were looking at perhaps is kind of considering again, you know, what our strengths are, and perhaps what our strengths are that are already known by the opposition. So whether that's technically or tactically, or certain players, or how they react in certain situations. So information that's already out there. But then I think actually it's really important, even though that we've obviously won the tournament in Finland, to not kind of rest on your laurels and think, okay, this is our technique and our tactics now. What is there that we could perhaps shift a little bit that can obviously bring that element of surprise, which is always good. So I think we're really kind of looking at that and trying to take away those positives from Finland, but also saying, that's great. Now, how can we shift that to bring in some just more unexpected elements, I would say, without saying too much.
No, it's good. Thank you. No, it's there's a lot that has been spoken about this term mental resilience, and I think right now, especially right now, certainly for many people that we know in our community within the context of the charity, families are having to be incredibly resilient and resourceful, and adapt in how they are living their day-to-day lives. Have you had to make many changes in terms of your day-to-day, your work and your life?
Probably not as much as a lot of people, to be fair. I've been quite fortunate in the sense that, PhD work at Loughborough can largely is done from home. And so I did some teaching part-time, so that sort of shifted online sort of in April, but then that sort of ended quite quickly. But other than that, it's kind of just probably doing more online-based sessions with clients as opposed to face-to-face. But I think in some ways that can be more useful for people anyway, in terms of access, in terms of schedules, location. So it's not changed a massive amount for me particularly. But I think, again, it's probably just recognizing that, everyone's in a different situation. And I think I saw a quote kind of at the start of lockdown, and it said, we're in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I think that's something that really resonated and I really liked. And I think, taking time to recognize if you are fortunate to be in a relatively okay, position, because there are obviously lots of people dealing with other challenges. And so I think, it's just not only thinking about your own situation, but being mindful of other people and the stresses they may be under as well.
Sure. I mean, speaking of other people's challenges, a slightly random question just to put into the mix here. What do you think politicians might learn from sports psychologists?
That's a tricky one.
You can keep this very, very brief if you wish.
I think, what can we learn from sports psychologists? I think sometimes it's perhaps, with my little experience of politicians, I suppose, but not coming in maybe as wanting to be that expert all the time, and actually learning from other people's experiences. And I would say a big part of my role in any environment is to come in and, yes, I have, psychological knowledge to help people, but I need to give them time to hear their stories and their experiences and learn what actually would help you. And I think, whether we think it or not, whether politicians do go out, some do, some don't, and listen to other people and understand people's lives, I think we can always do a bit more of that, whether it's, looking at people that are perhaps living in poverty, or looking at people, if they're a different race than you, if they've had a different upbringing than you. It's all just really important to understand people's experiences. So I'd say if anything, maybe particularly from the sports psychologist role, is to kind of go out there and actually try and get out of your bubble and just see what's happening with other people's lives, because you can make far more informed decisions based on that, I think.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would throw in the word empathy perhaps into the conversation, particularly around politicians. And maybe you're right, it's difficult, isn't it, when you're living in a closed bubble and you're having to make decisions and you're perhaps not fully informed. It's so important. Another question for you, actually, which is around, we're hearing an awful lot, aren't we, about players and athletes using psychologists to help improve their performance, but very, very little about, for example, the coaches and the managers having psychologists working with them. Have you got any perspectives that you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think traditionally, sports psychology has been thought to be kind of mainly for athletes, and it probably still is in how it's set up at the moment. That being said, for me, like I was saying a bit earlier, all the key stakeholders in sport, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent or carer, you all play a different but important role in that environment. Yeah. And I think can make a massive difference in setting the tone for an environment, in supporting different members of the team. And so for me, there possibly isn't enough work done sometimes with coaches and staff. And obviously, I can't speak for every psychologist and what work they're doing. So I'm sure there's lots of people across the world doing lots of great work with coaches. I suppose we probably hear about it less in the media, of sports psychologists working with, say, football managers as an example. I think perhaps in some sports, perhaps football as an example, there's maybe still some uncertainty about what sports psychology is, what it means. I think some people can think that if you're seeing a sports psychologist, it's because you've got problems and issues and challenges. But what I guess we always try and get across is actually it's building on strengths as well. As much as we can support you with those challenges, really trying to build on your strengths, what you already do well, and making it even better. And I definitely think coaches can really benefit from that because they have a massive influence over athletes. There's sort of it's difficult if you're working with athletes in isolation and you're doing some really great work with them, and perhaps a coach maybe has a different idea or a different approach or maybe a different way of putting things across that perhaps conflicts, then that obviously isn't very harmonious. So I think definitely I would say hopefully moving forward into the future, we will be doing more work with kind of coaches and management level for sure.
Now, for those of you who are tuning in from within the Muscle Warriors Powerchair Football Club community and further afield, because I know there are many from around the country who are also perhaps tuning in, we've got a little announcement, Erin, haven't we, that we've been chatting about. So some of you may know that I've been waiting, or you've been waiting patiently to hear about this special announcement, especially to those who are involved either directly or indirectly with the Muscle Health Foundation's Muscle Warrior Powerchair Football Club. Well, I'll cut to the chase this afternoon. I've been speaking with Erin over the last couple of months, and I'm thrilled to say that the charity is developing a new initiative where everyone involved in our Muscle Warriors Powerchair Football community, where everybody can get involved in contributing and making their own mark on the club's philosophy. Now, I know that being part of the Charities Football Club is not just about football. I mean, that's the most important thing, of course it is, but it's also about the social events that go on around the sport, for example. And it's often been said that within the Charities Muscle Warrior Powerchair Football community, it's often said that we're a family within a family. So what we're going to do, here comes the announcement, with Erin's help and Erin's support, is we're going to ensure that everyone feels a part of that Muscle Warrior team ethos. We're going to look together in building on the club's history. We're going to invite everyone. We're going to invite you all to come together, to work together, and to help build a unique legacy. And it's going to involve, guess what? It's going to involve a few Zoom calls, okay? It's going to involve a few face-to-face sessions with Erin and myself, and we're going to talk about that Muscle Warrior spirit. We're going to chat about the team's culture and the team's sort of ethos, if you like, and we're going to talk about what it means to be part of the team and how our new captain, Reece Mallett, will also be involved, and he's going to be helping as well this exciting new initiative to flourish. So ultimately, we're going to work together. Erin, you're going to support me on this. We're going to work together to create the Muscle Warrior Powerchair Football Club's own unique philosophy. Erin, do you want to say a few words on that?
Yeah, I think hopefully this should be a really exciting piece of work for everyone to get involved in, and like you've said, really, building on the club's history, building on connections, maybe on past influences as well as present ones. And really just coming together and allowing everyone a space to collaborate and have their say and I guess make their mark on the club and it moving forward. And I think that's again, we've obviously done some philosophy work at the England team, and I think that's been, hopefully they'll feel beneficial in just sort of giving us a bit of a united purpose. And like you said, what are the values, the beliefs of the club? What are the sort of just behaviours as well, day to day? How do we greet each other? What's our sort of what we like socially? And all of those things can make such a big difference. And again, bringing in everyone in that environment, not just the players and the staff, but also parents and carers as well. So hopefully something that everyone can kind of get on board with. And for me, really important that everyone feels they have a say in it and can be interactive with it. So that you feel that there's a part of you that's gone into the process that you can really buy into. But it should be a really kind of exciting piece of work, I think.
Yeah, no one's done it before. It's an innovative piece of work. We're looking to create something new and exciting. So you heard it here first. I've got another question that's popped into the chat room, which is around the Dutch FA. Apparently this week they've made a landmark decision, Erin, which you may have heard about, to allow a woman to play in a men's football team. So as an extension of this, so stay with me on this, should able-bodied people be allowed to play wheelchair sport, for example, or is it better to keep them apart?
I don't know whether I'm fully qualified to give an answer to that, really, I suppose.
Your perspective.
I guess my perspective, I suppose for me, obviously there is a difference between a woman playing in a men's team and perhaps an able-bodied person playing in sort of a para team. I suppose I would be tempted to kind of say perhaps it should maybe just be kept to kind of people who have disabilities in para sport, because I think that's can be such an important vehicle for them in their life, you know, being part of something. And I don't think necessarily having able-bodied people involved would take that away. But I think, you know, it would be interesting to see, you know, selection opportunities, how that works. So I think it would be a very complex issue and a very complex challenge if it was to merge. I don't necessarily think that it's out and out a bad idea. I just wonder whether is there a need for that? Because I know there's been, so in archery as an example, we've had a disabled archer, Danny Brown, compete as an able-bodied athlete. She kind of sat on a stool, but she competed internationally, and she, you know, would put out some of the best scores in the world and in the country. So that obviously, you know, that way round, she was really successful. I just wonder I'm not sure whether it would be sort of just stepping into a different territory, I suppose. But again, you know, for me, the most important voice to hear on that would actually be the kind of para sport community and how they felt about it. So for me, again, you know, I would sort of more take a backward seat and perhaps ask those questions to the relevant people. But for me, you know, I wouldn't necessarily push my view on anyone, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. In your sport, archery, I mean, do they have sports psychologists as well for archers? Presumably they do.
I think it's probably quite new. I think it's probably quite new to the sport. Hopefully, you know, I'm kind of getting out there in archery, and obviously because it is the sport I do, I think that it can be of benefit if you've got that kind of extensive experience in the sport, just because you'll know little kind of stories, or you'll have little similarities that maybe everyone goes through that I perhaps wouldn't have with a powerchair football player, or someone, you know, a swimmer as an example. But I think it's something that's growing. I wouldn't say I'm hugely aware of many kind of qualified sports psychologists working in the sport at the moment. But hopefully, like we say, you know, the field is growing, and I think it's becoming more kind of popular in media as well. So hopefully archery will latch on at some point and kind of get some more psychologists in there.
So we got a question coming through from one of our team players in the Muscle Warriors Powerchair Football Club, from Ryan. Afternoon, Ryan. Afternoon. Thanks for the question. So Ryan wants to know: are you, Erin, involved with the Head Up campaign?
Yeah. So Heads Up. So I know it's a
Heads Up,
mental health campaign within the FA. I know it's been started by the Duke of Cambridge, or he's kind of been a big leader in that. So I'm not personally involved in it. But I know that there will be many people in the FA who'll be, you know, sports psychologists and psychiatrists, no doubt, who will be involved in that. And I think, you know, it's a really important initiative. I think, if I'm correct, they've started off kind of focusing on men's football because of, you know, obviously kind of male suicide rates and things like that, which I think is obviously really important and a great step. I also think it's really important to branch that out into football as a whole, so whether that's women's football, men's football, or obviously we have lots of different para teams as well, Powerchair included. So I think hopefully, you know, they're at a good starting point now, and it is something that people are more aware of, and so hopefully it can kind of spread throughout the whole of football, and hopefully set a good example for other sports as well, I think.
Yeah. Another question coming in: where's Erin going to be in 5 years' time?
That is the question.
That is the question.
Hopefully not in lockdown, that's for sure. So 5 years. So I'll be 30 in 5 years' time. So a bit of a milestone, possibly. Probably finishing off the PhD, because I'm doing it part-time, so it's a bit of a longer route. And then I'd say hopefully still working, I'm sure, in applied sports psychology. You know, for me, big ambition is obviously everyone wants to go to the Olympics or the Paralympics, but to work at that sort of elite level, and just kind of continue doing that. But again, you know, with the PhDs looking at athlete mental health, and that's something that I've become more and more interested in as I've done more reading about it for the PhD, luckily. And so I think, going down that road, and I think there will be more career opportunities in that area as it becomes something that we hopefully look at more closely. So perhaps something kind of more towards welfare and well-being, as well as sort of that performance enhancement, I would say.
How is sports psychology actually changing? Because obviously, as you're doing your PhD, you're probably learning about all sorts of new things and new trends, perhaps, into the future. Are there any particular new trends going on?
I'd say I think it's such a vast field, I suppose, when you're in it. There's so much going on all the time. I guess, again, obviously I'm biased, but I think the athlete mental health stuff will be kind of hopefully at the forefront of the next few years. Looking at things coming out with British gymnastics and British cycling, other sports of, safeguarding wellbeing issues. I think so that will be sort of an area of particular growth. We'll just be sort of providing that support for athletes as well. But perhaps also maybe just more look at things like kind of culture working at an organisational level. So not just working individually with athletes, but so for an example, with the FA, you'd maybe work up with the kind of the people in management and it would filter down the system. So that's something that I'm particularly interested in, because I think it can be really impactful. But I'm sure there's lots of strides moving forward in every aspect. So it's probably quite challenging to pinpoint those, depending on what area you're interested in.
Where does the England Powerchair Football Team, where do they train? Are they up at St George's Park or?
No, so not at the moment. So we're at Stoke Mandeville at the moment. That's where we've sort of been training, which is great, good facility. In terms of as well, I think they're particularly accommodating in, I think, St George's Park. I think it can get quite cold in there, which obviously isn't ideal for our players. So, Stoke Mandeville obviously is a sort of more purpose-built for parasport in particular. And so I think that's probably one of the main drivers. So that's where we're sort of training at the moment. And then we're also sometimes at Lilleshall, which is nice for me because it's about half an hour down the road. So that's a nice one.
Yeah, that's easy for you. That's easy for you. We've got a question on the chat room, which is coming through the manager of the Muscle Warriors Powerchair Football Club. Hi, Liam. Thank you so much for the question. The question is, do you think sports psychology has a big impact on coaches?
Okay. I would hope so, because I think, they're a really key part, like we said, they're a really key part, key influences of athletes and of everyone in that environment. So I would hope that they are impacted by it. And I would say, I think sometimes people, maybe coaches, can be a bit daunted by sports psychology and sort of thinking, is this person going to come in and kind of take over or do something that I'm not familiar with? And I think that's understandable, because for a lot of people, it's quite new territory. But I think that's why, for me, in my role, I think it's really important to get across to the coaches. Again, it's a collaborative relationship. You want to work with them. You're not going to work I guess, against them or sort of, contradict their views. I think sometimes there may be some healthy challenge in there. I think that's needed in these environments. So it's, not to say we agree on absolutely everything, but I think, it's really key to get across to coaches that it's working with them collaboratively. And I think, coaches can benefit in multiple ways, but I think it's not only being able to support the athletes perhaps in a different way, or in a way that's perhaps more useful for certain players, but also actually benefiting from it themselves, because at the end of the day, coaches are human beings as well. So, managing their own stresses, performing under pressure, whether there's, personal issues that might be going on there as well. And so I do think that coaches can really sort of benefit from sports psychology. I think it's just a case of letting it in and seeing what it can do for you, really.
Yeah. It'd be good to get your insight, just a little note on social media and its impact on mental well-being, particularly of elite sports people. Does it sort of, do you think that it amplifies, here we are in the world of Twitter and so on, and do you think it amplifies their mental health, or in some cases their fragility?
I would say, I think for everybody, to be honest, social media can be difficult to manage. I think if you're in the public eye, if you've got people flinging opinions at you left, right and centre, that can probably be quite difficult. I think everyone has an opinion, everyone's sort of that armchair critic, I think, specifically in those sort of more well-known sports, maybe like football. where, you know, a lot of people do want to share their views on it. So I think that can be difficult in terms of managing that mentally. I wouldn't necessarily say it kind of amplifies. I guess I personally wouldn't use the word fragility. I would just maybe say if they've got mental challenges. And again, I think, you know, it's kind of looking at the language behind mental health and mental illness is really important, because again, you know, I know it's just an example, but as an example, that fragility, there's connotations to that of, you know, weakness or things like that. And so I think it's looking at those things like that language around it. But I think, you know, it can actually be a really good move forward, because actually if athletes can take charge of their own messages they're putting out there, if they are having mental health issues or challenges, or if they're actually doing well and they're working on things mentally, then if they can share that with others, and then that increases that conversation, reduces that stigma, I think that can definitely be a force for good. So I think it's probably a double-edged sword, really. I think, you know, there's goods and bad things of everything, but I think the more we can kind of get that conversation going, and talk to different people and know people's experiences of it, the better. I think maybe just sometimes social media can be quite brutal. So I think, yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act.
I think that's an excellent answer. Now, I'm delighted to say we have another question on our chat room, which has come in through one of our Muscle Warrior Powerchair Football Club team members, Jack. Jack, thank you so much for the question. The question is, what sports psychology books, Erin, would you recommend as good reads for athletes?
Okay. There are kind of more growing ones out there, to be fair. I know her name escapes me right now, but we can post up about it. There's an athlete who has done, from an athlete's perspective, about sports psychology and using it in sport. I believe she was a rower, an elite rower. So that would be a good one. Her name escapes me, but I can definitely send that information over.
Yeah,
I think, you know, I think it'd probably be worth me actually sending you maybe a list of a few, so that we can kind of get some good ones over there. I think there can be lots of different things. There can be lots of different books out there. And I think sometimes it can be challenging to know, you know, which ones are perhaps useful and written with particular kind of knowledge and insight. So I think there's always going to be lots of variation out there. But I'll put together kind of a list for you, and we can hopefully share that if people are interested in that, for sure.
No, fantastic. So any top tips for those that perhaps, you know, have heard a little bit about powerchair football? You've seen it, you've been involved in it at an elite level. You know, any suggestions, any top tips for those that might be interested in the sport, for example?
Yeah, so I would say, obviously, like anything, you need to kind of just give it a go, I suppose. And I think, I guess from a psychological point of view, it's, for me, I guess it's tricky. There's so much, I suppose, that you could say. But I think it's just trying to get involved, try and, I suppose, find a club that you feel fits you. Obviously, you know, location and things like that can be a kind of a restrictive factor. But, you know, you often get a feel for a vibe and an ethos in a club. So trying to get in there and, you know, feel that you fit in there, I think is a really good start. And then for anyone, I guess, from a mental point of view, looking to kind of improve their game or get into the sport, I think I would always say, you know, the first thing I always cover with people is building that self-awareness. So trying to understand why you maybe react in certain ways, perhaps why you maybe feel maybe fine leading up to a match, and then 10 minutes before you feel really pressured. So looking at maybe different reactions that you have, or different ways of feeling that you have, and trying to sort of think, okay, you know, when do I maybe feel least confident, and try and think, okay, why is that? And I think for me, the biggest sort of starting point is that self-awareness, because then if you can understand yourself, you can then communicate that to coaches, to me, or psychologists, you know, and that I think can be really beneficial.
So the author of Mind Games, Annie Vernon.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's one of them. Is that one of the? Yeah, that's definitely worth. So Jack, if you're tuning in, Annie Vernon, who's a former Olympic and world champion rower, and she was the author of Mind Games, which is apparently a fascinating book all about the psychology of elite sport.
Yeah, and from an athlete perspective as well. So that should be sort of interesting for people, I think.
So we've got another question. Time is ticking along, so a couple more questions. again, another member of the team, Shay's dad, Alan, said, Erin, how do you see the work with the coaches and managers starting off?
Okay, so I guess like any starting point, it's having that kind of willingness for them to be open-minded, and I think that's the same for anybody, you know, doing anything new. I think it's an open-mindedness from their part and from our part really as well. And I think maybe just kind of clarifying, you know, what a sports psychologist role is, what they'd be looking to do in that environment, and then for the coach to kind of, I guess, explore what would they be looking to get from the sports psychologist, whether that's for the athletes themselves or for them as a coach. And I think something that's really important to start off with is that role clarity. So, you know, how am I, if I go into a club, how am I going to work with them? When can I do my work? What does that look like? And I think that's probably a really good starting point. And then you can kind of work on some shared goals that you want to achieve with the club and kind of take it from there, I would say.
You know, it's been a fascinating conversation, Erin, as we come to the end of our In Conversation with series and episode 7. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of the charity, thank you so much for being such a great guest. I really enjoyed that conversation. It was a lot of fun. And in fact, if I could just invite you in this moment, Erin, to give your best muscle warrior salute. Great stuff. And you know what, if people wish to contact you, Erin, they can presumably reach you via your website at, what is it, epsportspsychology.co.uk.
Yeah.
Or via your social channels. I think you're on most of them.
Yeah.
And before we finish up, I'd love to get everyone's feedback. So please head to the charity's Facebook page, where you'll find a Survey Monkey link, 30 seconds of your time, and any comments so we can improve the broadcast experience going forwards. That would be wonderful. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, or indeed any of the past episodes, I'd be really grateful if you might consider making a small donation in support of the charity. And you know, you'll be helping us expand our continued virtual efforts in supporting our community across the country. And thank you so much. And for those that wish to perhaps volunteer or fundraise for us, head to musclehelp.com, where you can learn more about the work and impact of the charity and what we're doing at the moment, and how you can get involved. For our beneficiaries and families across the country who've tuned in today, thank you so much. And don't forget to reach out with any suggestions as to how we can support you at this time going forwards. And if you know someone who you think would like to participate in a future In Conversation with episode, please get in touch and let us know. And finally, drum roll. Here's the drum roll moment. Be sure you tune in for episode 8 on Friday, the 21st of August, 2 weeks' time. There's the diary date alert, when we'll be discovering how the Integrated Medicine Toolbox, did you get that? The Integrated Medicine Toolbox can help us all in maintaining our well-being during COVID-19 and beyond, with Dr. Minhar Rajput Ray, a medical doctor, a registered osteopath and naturopath, who's committed to bridging standard medical care with evidence-based holistic approaches, and whose favorite movie, because we like to do favorite movies, is none other than Mary Poppins. For now, stay safe and stay well. And until next time, big thanks again, Erin. Thank you so much. It was a really great conversation. Enjoyed it very much. And to Grace and my colleagues in the studio for making this all happen. Have a lovely weekend all. Enjoy the sunshine. Be sure you hydrate. And thank you so much. Bye-bye for now.